Right now, there is a phone in your pocket or on your desk. It is almost certainly not a Nokia. But 20 years ago, that would have been unthinkable. At its peak, Nokia was not just the biggest phone company in the world. It was the most valuable company in all of Europe. 1 in every 3 mobile phones sold on the planet carried that name. Entire economies leaned on it. Finland, a country of 5 million people, owed nearly 4% of its entire gross domestic product to a single corporation. That corporation was Nokia. So what happened? How does a company that dominant, that embedded in daily life, simply vanish from relevance in the span of a decade? The answer is far stranger than you think. And it has almost nothing to do with making bad phones. Let's go back to where it started. Not in a Silicon Valley garage, not in Tokyo or Seoul. In a small Finnish town called Tampere, in 1865, a man named Fredrik Idestam built a paper mill on the banks of the Nokian Virta River. That river gave the company its name. For nearly a century, Nokia made paper, then rubber, then cables, then televisions. Nokia was not born a technology company. It became one almost by accident. By the 1990s, Nokia had pivoted hard into telecommunications, and the timing was perfect. The mobile phone was arriving, and Nokia was ready. Through the 1990s and into the early 2000s, Nokia moved faster than anyone. Its engineers were brilliant. Its design team was ahead of their time. The Nokia 3310, released in the year 2000, became a cultural artifact. People still talk about it. Indestructible. Simple. Reliable. Nokia understood what people wanted from a phone better than anyone else on Earth. By 2007, it controlled nearly 40% of the entire global mobile phone market. 40%. No company before or since has held that kind of grip on a consumer electronics market that large. Then Steve Jobs walked onto a stage in San Francisco and held up a small glass rectangle. You have seen what happened next. The iPhone arrived, Android followed, and Nokia, the company that had dominated the mobile world for 15 years, began to fall. Within 6 years, its phone division was sold to Microsoft for a fraction of what it had once been worth. Most people assume Nokia simply missed the smartphone revolution, that its engineers were too slow, too arrogant, or too comfortable to see what was coming. That is the popular story. It is also wrong. Here is what the research actually shows. In 2015, a group of business school academics, Huy and Vuori from INSEAD and Amy Edmondson from Aalto University, published one of the most important case studies in modern business history. They spent years interviewing Nokia's senior engineers, middle managers, and top executives. What they found was not a company full of people who didn't see the iPhone coming. It was a company full of people who saw it coming very clearly and were too afraid to say so out loud. Nokia's engineers had working touchscreen prototypes years before the iPhone launched. Some insiders claim they had early versions of app stores, location-based services, and internet connectivity on devices as far back as 2004. The technology existed inside Nokia's own labs. The future was already there. But something stopped it from reaching the market. That something was fear. Huy and Vuori identified a specific dynamic at work inside Nokia during this period. Middle managers were terrified of delivering bad news to senior leadership. The CEO and top executives had built a culture of extreme performance pressure. Numbers had to go up. Targets had to be hit. Anyone who raised a concern about the company's direction risked being seen as a problem. So people stopped raising concerns. Engineers who knew the software was failing kept quiet. Managers who sensed the market shifting wrote optimistic reports anyway. The flow of honest information through the organization dried up. And at the top, the executives were making decisions based on reports that had been quietly edited to remove anything that might cause discomfort. This is a phenomenon that psychologists call psychological safety, or more precisely, its absence. The researcher Amy Edmondson at Harvard Business School has spent decades studying what happens when people in organizations feel they cannot speak up without punishment. Her findings are consistent. When psychological safety collapses, performance collapses with it. Not immediately, not visibly. It collapses slowly, invisibly, underneath a surface of confident-sounding reports and optimistic forecasts. Nokia is one of the most dramatic case studies of this collapse in corporate history. But there was a second force at work. Not just fear, but what Huy and Vuori called a failure of middle power. Nokia was enormous. It had layers upon layers of management. The people who understood the technology best, the engineers, the product designers, the people who had actually used a prototype touchscreen device and knew exactly how far behind Nokia's software was, those people had almost no power to change strategy. They sat too far down the hierarchy. The people at the top who did have the power to change course were receiving filtered information and had no direct contact with the technology or the users. The gap between knowledge and power inside Nokia was fatal. Here is what makes this even stranger. Nokia's executives were not stupid people. They were not lazy. Many of them were extraordinarily talented. There is documented evidence that Nokia's CEO at the time, Jorma Ollila, and his senior team were receiving private reports suggesting the smartphone era was coming. Consultants had told them. Analysts had told them. Some of their own people had told them. And yet the organization could not act on that knowledge fast enough or decisively enough to matter. Why? Because large organizations develop something like immune systems. They reject change the way a body rejects a foreign organ. Every proposed shift in strategy triggers a response. Budget reviews, political resistance, competing priorities, the natural inertia of thousands of people who have built their careers around doing things the way they are currently done. The bigger and more successful the organization, the stronger the immune system. And Nokia, at its peak, was as big and successful as a company can get. Nokia's software was a particular problem. The operating system it ran on, called Symbian, had been designed for a different era. It was built to run on devices with limited processing power, limited memory, small screens, and no touchscreen input. By 2007, when Apple launched iOS, Symbian was already struggling to keep up. Fixing it would have required tearing it apart and rebuilding it from the ground up. Nokia knew this. The engineers knew this. Reports documenting this reached management. But rebuilding Symbian meant admitting that the platform the entire product line depended on was fundamentally broken. It meant writing off years of investment. It meant telling shareholders that the foundation of the business needed to be replaced. That conversation was too uncomfortable to have. So it was not had. Not in time. Meanwhile, Apple was doing something Nokia had never done. Apple was not building a phone. Apple was building a pocket computer that happened to make calls. Steve Jobs explicitly said this in his launch keynote. The framing mattered enormously. When your product definition is phone, you optimize for calls, battery life, and durability. When your product definition is pocket computer, you optimize for processing power, software capability, and the user experience of doing everything. Nokia was optimizing for the wrong thing while Apple was redefining what the thing was. There is a concept in business strategy that the researcher Clayton Christensen at Harvard spent his career documenting. He called it the innovator's dilemma. The idea is straightforward and devastating. The very practices that make a company successful, listening to existing customers, protecting profitable product lines, investing in proven technologies, are the exact same practices that make it impossible to respond to disruptive change. Nokia's customers in 2005 wanted better cameras, longer battery life, and more durable handsets. Nokia gave them exactly what they asked for. The customers who wanted a pocket computer with a touchscreen and an app store were not Nokia's customers yet. So Nokia was not building for them. By the time those customers became the majority, it was too late. By 2010, the writing was on every wall. Nokia's market share was collapsing. Its software was years behind. Its top engineers were leaving. In 2011, a new CEO named Stephen Elop, the first non-Finnish CEO in Nokia's history, imported directly from Microsoft, released an internal memo that became famous. He compared Nokia to a man standing on a burning oil platform. The memo was meant to shock the company into action, but the platform had been burning for years. Everyone inside had either been afraid to say so or had not been listened to when they tried. Elop made a decision that many analysts still debate. He announced that Nokia would abandon its own software platforms and build all future smartphones on Microsoft's Windows Phone operating system. The announcement had an immediate and catastrophic effect. Overnight, anyone considering buying a Nokia device knew that the current platform was dead. Sales collapsed before the new Windows Phone devices were even ready to ship. Nokia had announced its own funeral before the replacement was in place. By 2013, the phone division that had once been worth tens of billions of dollars was sold to Microsoft for just over $7 billion. Microsoft wrote most of that off within 2 years. The Nokia phone brand had effectively ceased to exist. And yet the original Nokia company still exists. Quietly, it became a major infrastructure company. It builds the wireless networks that your phone actually runs on. The antennas, the base stations, the systems that make 4G and 5G possible. Nokia equipment powers much of that. It survived by becoming invisible, by retreating into the walls of the world instead of the screens. Here is what this means for you. Because you have been in this situation, not at the scale of a billion-dollar corporation, but the same dynamics play out in your own life, in every organization you have ever been part of. There have been things you knew were true that you did not say out loud because the culture around you punished honesty. There have been moments when the gap between what you knew and what you were allowed to act on was too wide to cross. There have been times when the thing you were optimizing for stopped being the thing that mattered, and you kept optimizing for it anyway because changing course felt like admitting failure. Nokia did not collapse because it ran out of talent. It collapsed because it ran out of honesty. Because the information that could have saved it existed inside the building, in the heads of the people who work there. And the organization had accidentally built a system that prevented that information from reaching the people who needed it. The most dangerous thing about that kind of collapse is how long it takes to become visible. On the surface, everything looks fine. The reports are optimistic. The revenue is still coming in. The brand is still strong. The people are still working hard. But underneath, the foundation is cracking. And the only thing that could stop it is a conversation that everyone has agreed, without saying so, not to have. Tonight, you will probably use a smartphone. It will almost certainly not be a Nokia. But somewhere in the building you work in, or the team you belong to, there is a version of that conversation waiting to happen. The question is whether your culture will let it. If you enjoy videos like this, ensure you subscribe to Behind the Tech, where we uncover the real stories behind the world's most powerful inventions. See you in the next video.